Yep, I hear you. What's that? I can't help it. I'm not going to wait for everybody. I'm just looking to Mike. He's going to give me the clue.
Don, you're ready, or whenever you're ready.
Good morning to you all. Glad to see you here, and also those that are be joining us with the live streaming. I'm Reverend Dr. Donald Weaver, and this morning we will be looking at world religions, Christianity and world religions, and focusing in on Islam. I want you to notice the word Islam up here, because in the Arabic, vowels are not the same as the vowels are in English. For fact, there is a lot fewer vowels. Notice the S, L, and the M. Now, use your imagination and kind of slide those up onto the wall. S, L, M. Because that is the root word. Now, I'm not much of a linguist, I have to admit. For a fact, when I took in junior high, when I took 10 weeks of Latin, I failed it. So, you know, I've learned, though, the value of learning other languages. So, we're just going to slide that up, S, L, and M. That is the root word that comes out of the ancient Egypt history that is the basis for Islam. But if you also notice, it is also the basis for the word Muslim. M-U-S-L-I-M. Remember, the vowels are not what they are in our English. But you can even go further. There's a greeting in Hebrew that is shalom, peace. S-H-A-L-O-M. Again, S, the L, and the M. Now in Arabic, there is also the word for peace, and that's salam. S-A-L-A-A-M. Take the vowels out, and what do you have left? S-L-M. Now that's important to understand both Hebrew, but it's also important to understand Arabic as well, and to also understand Islam. Now, back in the 40s and 50s, when I lived here in Kenmore, the greatest dialogue was between Roman Catholics and Protestants. Once in a while, you might come across a Jew in school, but it was mostly Roman Catholics and Protestant. 40s and 50s were back when I was in elementary school. and junior high school and beginning high school. Very few times did you see any other religions in your classmates. So, the major dialogue was between Roman Catholic and Protestants. I can remember on Mondays, the Roman Catholic kids going off for religious instruction. I can remember in the village at Kenmore seeing creche scenes at Christmas on the municipal building lawn. I can remember going and participating in Christmas concerts where Christmas music was played. Things have changed a great deal. We now are a very, very diverse society. I notice this most when I go to grocery shopping. You see people in different outfits, and you begin to realize that these are people from other faiths. Jewish and Islam. More and more our neighbors are unaffiliated. Higher percentage of people in our community no longer consider themselves one faith or another. It is estimated that in 2040, the year 2040, that the Muslims will almost equal Christians around the world. So I think that knowledge of other faiths is absolutely critical. It's critical in terms of looking at our globe, understanding world peace and how to get along with other persons. And I believe firmly that we will never find peace in our neighborhoods, in our nation, in our world, unless we come to an understanding of what drives people in their faith and understand the faith of others. What is truth? Well, that's a great question. Two persons can be exposed to the very same moment, the very same experience, but they can describe it in very, very different ways. I don't know if you've noticed, but when I get up to give a sermon, I pray to God that either through me or in spite of me, people will hear the word of God. Why do I pray that? It is because I find, I stand at the back of the church after a worship service and people come out and say, you said just exactly what I needed to hear today. And then they tell me what they heard, and I don't remember saying that at all. It's because they found truth in something that I triggered. It wasn't necessarily me. When I stand behind the pulpit, do I speak the word of God as if there was nothing else that I could say? No. I speak my understanding of the truth. It's the hearer that needs to determine what is truth. So we may all find truth in different ways. What we need to do is listen. Listen to people and hear what they're saying and become an understanding for ourselves of what the truth is. Because I don't think any one of us has a corner on the truth. Some people may be closer to the truth than others. Some may not have the truth at all. Chances are, some of us are closer to the truth than others. More often than not, those on one side or on the other side, neither one are really have the truth. And they may not be absolutely right. But let's give them the credit for the fact that they could be partly right. So it should not be a surprise to anybody that different people in different places with different cultures at different times will find different solutions to the puzzle of human yearnings, experiences, or what we might call religious questions. So, religion, I believe, is the study of growing in our understanding of God and how God works. It's a matter of growing in it, not proclaiming it as much as if it is the only truth there is. So let's check out Abraham. He came out of a family where there was a worship of many gods, and I told you about the camp last week that we did, where we tried to help young people understand what a contribution Abraham gave to society when there were so many gods. And he proclaimed that there was one God. It was through Abraham's experience that belief in this one God came about. A revolutionary idea. And then others came after him, including Moses, who moved people to a more sophisticated way of understanding what this one God was all about. Now, I know that there's some that would say that all religions are pointing in the same direction, leading to the same place. All religions are equally valid paths to the ultimate reality. Well, I'm not sure that I would accept that. For there's a few fallacies that come into the situation, because there are some who start religions who are just wrong. Just wrong. We've seen this, at least in two different ways, within our lifetime. And both of these ended up in mass suicides. I certainly would not consider those to be valid answers to the ultimate realities. These are not paths to the ultimate. At the same time, it's good to understand that the basic tenets of beliefs of those around us, so that we know what motivates them. It's when we don't do that we invite mistrust and fear and further separation. I think the greatest example in our time has been the experience of 9/11. I watched the television that morning, when at first we didn't know what was happening with the towers and the plane going into the towers. I happened to be watching television that morning. And some thought it was just a small plane that went in. But as the day went on, we learned that it was a group of persons that were called Muslims that did it in the name of their God. This had a tremendous impact, not only in our own country, but around the world. And it had a tremendous impact upon the Muslim community, not realizing that these were extremists that were doing it in the name of their God Allah. Now, there's no question about it that Muslims, extreme Muslims, are a threat to our society. But the greatest threat could be not necessarily to Christians, but to other Muslims, because what the extremists want to do is roll back the ideas of the Muslim faith to an earlier time, to pull them back from being more progressive, to enter into a global, modern world. They want to go back to a former time. I can tell you that that was a unique experience to go to New York City. That the plane went in on Tuesday. On Wednesday, we got the notice, Barb and I, that we were to go to New York City. We first started out in another building that was an armory. Then we moved to a pier by the river. And right next to us in the next pier was an aircraft carrier. At this point, we had no idea if there was going to be any more attacks. We'd heard about what had happened in Pennsylvania and what could have happened and did happen at the Pentagon. And we were told every morning if any of us wanted to go home, we could. Our kids, I think I've told this story over and over again, our kids don't always like it where we go to help out UMCOR. And so before we left, they came over to the house and put their name on all the furniture that they wanted in case we didn't return. You know, that was their way of giving us a message, a little hint that they didn't like where we were going. It was a tremendous time when our nation and our world were really on a precipice. So we do have to acknowledge that there are Muslims, a small percentage, that are extremists. We also have to admit, as we look at the Muslim faith and Islam in general, is that there are some warlike parts to the Muslim faith. And it's clearly attested to in the Quran. But we need to remember that our Old Testament isn't void of violence. Joshua fit the battle of Jericho. God told others to go and massacre men, women, and children. That's all a part of our Old Testament. So that we, as Christians, also have within our past and within our scriptures the idea of war. So let's look at what the background of the Islamic faith is. It comes out of Genesis 17. And Abraham said to God, "Oh, that Ishmael might live in your sight." God said, "But your wife Sarah," notice it says, "your wife Sarah shall bear you a son, and you shall name him Isaac.
I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his offspring after him.
As for Ishmael, now remember, Ishmael was born of the maidservant
Of Sarah.
I have
Heard you speaking to Abraham. I will bless him and make him fruitful and exceedingly numerous. He shall be the father of 12 princes, and I will make him a great nation.
So Ishmael was
Recognized as an important prophet
and is known as the patriarch.
patriarch of Islam.
Now Muslims believe that
Ishmael was the firstborn of Abraham, which indeed he was. Born to him
from, as they put it, his second wife.
wife, Hagar. Ishmael is recognized by Muslims as the ancestor of several of the prominent Arab tribes and as the forefather of Muhammad.
If you trace that lineage, there is some doubt as to whether the lineage from of Muhammad can be
Traced back to Ishmael, but believe that it is this. Muslims also believe that Muhammad was the descendant of Ishmael that would establish a great nation.
And this was
Promised by God. And it is a part of our Old Testament.
so let's look at the historical context of all of this.
4 BC,
Jesus was born in Nazareth. Now, I know some of you are going to question about 4 BC. Why? Isn't it 0? Well, you see, someone made a mistake when they made up the calendar that we follow. It was really humorous to me that everybody was concerned about the year 2000. Remember when we were concerned that the world might come to an end because it was turning from 1999 to the year 2000? Well, the fact was it wasn't really the year 2000, and it's not really the year 2021 if you're going by Jesus' birth. Those who know the scriptures and know history know that Jesus was born when there was a census. That's why Joseph went to Bethlehem. There was no census, and Roman records are pretty clear. There was no census in year 0. So it would either have to be before 0 or after 0. So 4 BC is probably the best.
example of that. About 29 AD, Jesus was crucified.
Between the years 49 and 100, and gives you a little bit of leeway.
Beyond that, perhaps, the New Testament was composed.
But what I'm really trying to do is to try to give you an idea of when Muhammad lived.
Between 570
In 632 AD. So this was quite a time after.
the time of Jesus on earth.
610 is the date that Muslims
So will tell you that Islam is born as a religion.
and the first Islamic state was established in Medina.
In 622,
And somewhere around 635, the Quran is compiled.
from Moses' saying, Muhammad's sayings, excuse me.
So Muhammad was the founder of the Muslim faith. Muhammad did not have a very easy life in his beginning. His father died just before he was born.
His mother died when he was 6 years old. His grandparents then raised him, but soon after they moved, he moved to his grandparents. They died. So tragedy followed Muhammad quite often. It ended up that his uncle raised him. Now, Mecca, where his uncle lived and where Muhammad lived, was a tremendous trade area, region. And Muhammad's uncle was a trader, T-R-A-D-E-R, not traitor, but trader. And so Muhammad was exposed to many, many different kinds of people. But because of all these tragedies that had happened in his life, he was looking for spiritual truth. He did not find it in Mecca itself, in the majority of people. Mecca also, because it was also a trade unit or trade area, it was also an area of many, many different deities. Extremely confusing. And all these different tribes had their deity. Hundreds and hundreds of these deities. But Muhammad was attracted to a small group of people that were known as Hebrews, Jews, and another small community of people that were Christians that lived on the outskirts. And part of his attraction was the belief in one God. He loved their stories. He loved their scriptures. This is a very, very important aspect of the Muslim faith, something to keep in your mind, that Muhammad was tremendously affected by the Jews and by the Christians. He was raised in a very poor family, his uncle, but he was very respected. And as a trader, he was respected as a person. And people trusted Muhammad. They didn't understand his attraction to the Christian and the Hebrew faith, but he was respected. So as I said, Mecca was this town of many, many, or region of many, many different gods, many deities. Now, the other thing that's really important about Muhammad is he never, ever learned to read or write. That comes into play in a very important way. But he was attracted to these people that lived really on the outskirts of Mecca. At age 25, he married. Now, he married a woman that was 15 years older than him. He had 6 children, 2 boys, 4 girls. But once again, tragedy struck. The 2 boys died. This even caused him to search more deeply for religious truth, spiritual understanding. But again, he was troubled by those that believed in many, many gods. And he was attracted to those who believed in the one God. Part of Muhammad's habits were to go off up into the hills of Mecca and go to a cave. He could be by himself.
And this one time, a very important experience happened
to Muhammad.
at the age about 40. He climbed into this one of the caves that he would go to reflect on his spiritual truths. And in the midst of his prayers, he fell asleep. But in his sleep, he saw himself being visited by an angel, which he later came to know as Gabriel. And Gabriel said to Muhammad, "Recite, recite!" And Muhammad said, what am I supposed to recite? By the way, that word recite is very important. We'll come to that in a few minutes. The story goes that Gabriel woke him up and said, "Muhammad, Muhammad, read this." Obviously, Muhammad turned back to him and said, "I can't read." Muhammad said, "I don't know how to read." Then the angel repeated, "Muhammad, read this." And the way the story goes is that the angel Gabriel pressed the parchment so deeply into his chest that Muhammad thought he would die. But Muhammad believed that he was getting the direct word from God. Now that's important to understand. The direct words of God. When he woke up, he realized that the parchment now, what appeared on the parchment, was written on his heart. And he became terrified. And he went back to the city to tell his wife, "I've seen a demon, or I've seen an angel. I'm losing my mind," he said. I don't know which. During the next 23 years, Muhammad would go back to that cave, and he had over and over again these experiences that he gained through this vision that he had of being visited by the angel Gabriel. And so he would go back to Mecca and call them to a new law. Abandon your pagan gods. But the people of Mecca did not listen. Now it's told in the history of Muhammad that he gathered only a few followers, family and perhaps 40 other persons. And his life was threatened because of all that he had to say. So he went to a neighboring town, Medina. And in that town, he became the people's political, military, and religious leader. He was welcomed in Medina. And he taught the people to worship Allah and established the first Islamic state. The word Islam and the word Muslim both have their root in those three letters that I gave you before. The root meaning is surrender or submission. S-L-M, of submission to Allah, to God. Now, we get all bent out of shape about this word Allah in substitute for God. But remember, the Hebrews had a different word for God as well. They called him Yahweh. The Spanish have a different word for God. I don't remember just exactly what that was. Remember, I failed Latin way back when. It was because of the importance of the experience of this time period that the Islamic calendar begins in AD 622. So for the Muslims, this year is 1441, not 2021. The Islamic calendar has only 354 days, not 365. So Muhammad continued to explain these visions that he had. And after Muhammad's death, which was, well, I skipped one part of this, and that is that Muhammad, as a leader, a political leader and a military leader and a religious leader in Medina, also had the opportunity as a military leader to go to neighboring towns trying to get people to follow his way. So Muhammad led his troops, and he became a military leader, in battles with people of the surrounding towns and villages in order to expand his power and to spread the rule of God, or what he called Allah. And it was in one of these battles that he went to Mecca. And he won that battle. And he consolidated his power. And Mecca and Medina became almost like one. And they did away with the worship, he did away with the worship idols, and influenced people in Mecca to worship Allah. It was after Muhammad's death that these visions were carefully recorded in a book called the Quran. And I have an English copy of the Quran. Now, the Quran is the Bible of Muslims. But the Quran in English does not have the same authority as the Bible in Arabic. So in a few minutes, I'm going to read from that one of the stories that we're very familiar with, because it's sort of a Christmas story, but Muhammad's version of that. One of the things about the Quran is when you read the Quran, it's written in first person. So it is as if God is speaking each of these words. And remember that that was the uniqueness about Muhammad, is that he was reciting back to that word. And the Quran, the word Quran in Arabic, is the word for recite. Recitation. Reciting over and over again. The words in the Quran are first-person voice, as if God is speaking and giving instructions directly to the human race. And you'll hear that in a minute. Because the Quran is believed to contain God's actual words, it is considered to be the final and absolute authority for Islam. And the Islamic faith believes that if there was any controversy between the Old and New Testament and the Quran is the thing that is right. The Quran does have many of the persons that are
outstanding persons in both the Old and New Testament. Now, what I'd like to do is read you a portion, and you'll get the idea about the Quran speaking in first person, but a very familiar story, and that's the story of how the angel Gabriel came to Mary. You recall that in our tradition, Mary was visited by the angel and told that she would have a son, Jesus. Now, think about this, because this is going to blow your mind in terms of the difference between what we celebrate as Christmas and what comes out of the Quran. And this is from the chapter that's called Mary. Mentioned in the scriptures the story of Mary. She withdrew from her family to a place east and secluded herself away. We, here's where it's first person, sent our spirit to appear before her in the form of a normal human. She said, I seek the Lord of mercy, protection against you. If you have any fear of him, do not approach. But he said, but I am a messenger from your Lord, come to announce to you the gift of pure son. She said, how can I have a son when no man has touched me? I have not been unchaste. And he said, this is what your Lord said, it is easy for me. We shall make him a sign to all people, a blessing from us. And so it was ordained, she conceived him, she withdrew to a distant place, and when the pains of childbirth drove her to cling to the trunk of a palm tree, she explained, I wish I had been dead and forgotten long before all this. But a voice cried out to her below, do not worry, your Lord has provided a stream at your feet. Now, you know, we have Christmas trees, right? That's sort of symbolic. Listen to this tree. And if you shake the trunk of the palm tree towards you, it will deliver fresh, ripe dates for you. So eat, drink, be glad, and say to anyone you may see, I have vowed to the Lord of mercy to abstain from conversation, and I will not talk to anyone today. She went back to her people carrying the child, and they said, Mary, you have done something terrible. Sister of Aaron, your father was not a bad man, your mother was not unchaste. She pointed to him. They said, how can we converse with an infant? But he said, I am the servant of God. He has granted me the scripture, made me a prophet, made me blessed wherever I may be. He commanded me to pray, to give alms as long as I live, to cherish my mother. He did not make me domineering or graceless. Peace was on me the day I was born, and I will be on me the day I die, and the day I am raised to life again. Such was Jesus, son of Mary. Very different story of a birth, right? It's the difference between how the Muslims see this and how we see it. There is also significant differences in the details and events between the Christian Bible and the Quran. For example, Jesus is acknowledged in the Quran is a very important prophet and the Jewish Messiah, but is not held to be the Son of God and is not believed to have been crucified or resurrected from the dead. Whenever Muslims speak of the name of Jesus, they always follow it. And this tells you the great reverence they have for Jesus. Peace be upon him. Just as they do in speaking the name of Muhammad. The Quran includes stories of war and violence. But what we need to realize, so does the Old Testament, and our Bible includes stories of warfare and violence as well. So here are the pillars of the Islamic faith. First is the belief and the confession of faith that there is but one God, Allah, and that Muhammad is his servant and prophet. Second is the practice of 5 daily prayers said at certain intervals each day by every devout Muslim. When reciting these prayers, Muslims kneel facing Mecca and bow their heads to touch the ground, prostrate themselves before God. There is the observance required of fasting from dawn to sunset through an entire month of Ramadan. And for us this year, it would have been April 23rd to May 23rd. Fourth is charity and the giving of alms. Islam directs that 2.5% of one's income and property should be distributed each year to the poor. And the fifth, once during every Muslim's lifetime, he or she is to make a pilgrimage to Mecca in remembrance of Abraham, Ishmael, and Hagar. So what are the things that are the same? We both believe in one God. We both believe in the life of prayer. We both believe in fasting, as Christians do during Lent, they do during Ramadan. We believe in caring for the poor. And although it's not required, many people do make a pilgrimage to Israel. So there are some similarities, but there's also some important differences. For Muslims, the Quran is the final authority, the ultimate revelation of God. For Christians, Jesus Christ is the final authority, the ultimate revelation of God, God's living word. For Muslims, Jesus is very important as a prophet. For Christians, Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, the Savior, who was crucified, buried in a tomb, and resurrected from the dead. For Muslims, the Supreme Being spoke to human beings through the Quran. For Christians, God speaks to human beings through a variety of ways in God's continuing self-revelation. Committed Muslims are persons who are striving to lead moral lives in accordance with the Supreme Being. What about this question of violence? Christianity and Islam, along with every other religion, have both good and bad interpreters of their faith. There are extremists in all faith. Hate groups have a way of misquoting sacred writings to justify the egregious acts. They do not accurately represent the faith they try to represent. Some things that we could learn from the Islamic faith. Yep, they have a deep loyalty to God. They seek the highest ideals of the Quran. They have much to teach us about surrendering to God. They're devoted to very committed prayer life. They're also committed to giving their income to the poor. I realize that there's a difference of our understanding the ways of God, even though they worship the same God. They revere Jesus, but see him in a very different light than we do as Christians. Although we have our differences, I believe that we need to come to an understanding of the Islamic faith. It will not come through criticism or judging Islam or arguing with them or fearing them or ignoring them just because they are different. Adam Hamilton puts it this way: we Christians also have much to share with Muslims about Jesus Christ and what he can do in their lives. The only way I believe we can share the gospel with our Muslim neighbors is reaching out to them in love. Muslims are the second largest world religions. They are the youngest world religion. It is estimated that their growth will be far greater than the Christian growth, plus 70. Christians, plus 34. So with a 32% growth overall, globally, I think we're going to need to understand and be able to communicate with the Muslim faith. And I think there's no greater example of how this has been done other than what Barb has to share with you when she was called by UMCOR to go to Bosnia. And there she worked with some of the Muslims, and just briefly she's going to give you an idea of what went on. Is that turned on?
I think this, is this on? Yeah, it is. Over 20 years ago, pardon me?
Turn it on.
Is it on? Oh, it's on.
It's on.
Over 20 years ago, I stood here to this congregation and said UMCOR had given me a call to see if I would go to Bosnia. That for 4 years, all this warring had been going on between Serbs and Muslims, and so many men and children had been killed, that women were taking over the care of those in refugee camps, but they didn't quite know what to do with what they had. And they said, would you take what we do as UMCOR and our work with children in times of disasters? So I asked for the help of this wonderful congregation, and 13 kits of comfort were put together. And UMCOR sent them ahead of me. And I had the opportunity to work with 13 women that were in refugee camps to be able to talk about how important it was to listen, how to be able to use toys as tools to be able to allow for them to get through some of the pain and difficulties that they had been going to. So I knew that I was going to have 13 women for a week. And each one of them would then have one of these kits to have. But I wasn't sure that UMCOR was going to get them all there, so I took one on my own, oh me of little faith, just being doubly prepared. And I had one kit left over. And halfway through the seminar, someone came and said, would you be willing to stay an extra day? I'd like to take you to this town called Guernivaku. In this town, there are landmines all over the place, so the children cannot walk on sidewalks. And they play on the roofs of children. And so I thought, I could do this. So I went, and I always had an interpreter with me. And this interpreter came, and we slept in a one-room apartment with UMCOR and Church World Service blankets on it, and I thought, wow, this stuff goes all the way around the world. And that morning, we walked to a school. The buildings were all plastered with gunshot. There was a principal and 5 teachers. The windows were broken. They had about 4 items that they could use to be able to teach. 3 pencils, no paper. And so, with the help of this interpreter, we were able to open this kit of comfort for kids, which had puzzles, which had crayons, which had paper, which had books, had blown up balls that could be blown up so that they could get rid of anger and all these things. And the principal came to me and she said, I am a Muslim, and you could come to me with these gifts of love. He said, I know in some way that we were meant to be. So I wiped away a tear or two and put this in my memory book that will be a part of me forever. It was not an easy trip for me the whole time because I traveled alone. I didn't speak the language. But somehow the language of love and care can happen whenever we want to make it happen.
So, I don't want to take longer, but I hope in some way, although this sounds pretty academic, it helps you to understand a little bit about Muslims. I am not an expert. I'm learning as well, but I'm committed to the idea that we need to understand the Muslim faith. If they are not already, they will be our neighbors. And the only way we can reach them is through the love that Christ teaches us, as Barbara has explained and what she did in terms of going to a Muslim country. Umkhor Center, knowing full well there were not Christians in that vicinity, but with the idea that we needed to express Christian love to our Muslim cousins, because they really are that. I do have some copies of what I've said if you want to do further study on it. I welcome talking with you more about it because I'm learning as well as hopefully you have learned at least something about the Muslim faith. Some very, I think, interesting concepts that have been brought about because we are now living closer and closer together. Okay, thank you.
Next week?
Okay, next week, much lighter. Donna Smith made a DVD that was shown to the Corinthian class in 2015 about Thanksgiving. So we'll rest ourselves from this deep thinking to think about gratitude and Thanksgiving next week. It's a beautiful DVD. Beautiful DVD.
Ready?
Thank you.